Welcome to the Real News Network in Baltimore. I'm Kim Brown. On Sunday, Haitian voters took to the polls after their national elections were delayed for several weeks following the devastating hit that the island country took from Hurricane Matthew back in early October. And the ballot was chock-filled with choices, 27 candidates alone running for president and several dozen people seeking to fill only a fraction of open seats in the Senate and in the lower chamber of deputies. So what are the issues and concerns that Haitian voters brought to the polls with them? And to discuss this, we're joined with Margaret Prescod. Margaret is the host and producer of the Sojourner Truth radio show, which is available on Pacifica radio outlets nationwide. She's been reporting on the ground in Haiti for the elections. Margaret, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you, Kim.
So, Margaret, you're on the ground there in Port-au-Prince. The elections were held on Sunday. Tell us about how the state of the country is in the aftermath of the devastatingly fatal hurricane that struck Haiti back in October. Was the country prepared for these elections?
Well, there's been a debate about that. People on the grassroots level, the base, they wanted these elections. There were some who were pushing for the elections to be delayed, which they were as a result of the hurricane, but there is a constitutional deadline of February the 7th for the seating of a new president. And that in itself, the way the election was set up to be held yesterday on November 20th, and a runoff election to happen at the end of January. People are very concerned about the runoff date in particular, whether or not they'll be able to meet that constitutional deadline of February 7th for a seated president. So in a lot of ways, a number of people felt there really was no choice but to move ahead with the elections. Clearly, the southern part of the island, which was hardest hit here in Port-au-Prince, and you don't see that much damage from the hurricane, although you still see the remnants of damage from the earthquake, with people still living in tent cities, etc. So I'm told that the interim government did what they could to get the polls up and running, even in some of those devastated areas. A larger problem, though, Haitians have to produce a national identity card in order to be able to vote. And for grassroots people, this identity card has been very, very difficult to get. A young man that I spent a few days with because he was helping us with our transport, he tried to get his identity card for over a year. And as of yesterday, he still didn't have it. And so he wasn't able to vote. So there are a lot of concerns. Even though people wanted the elections to be held, people were very worried about if the elections would be free and fair. I had one young man tell me he's not even going to bother to vote because everybody knows that the United States selects the Haitian president. So what's the point of voting? That tells you quite a lot, doesn't it, Kim?
It's so interesting, Margaret, because then we hear some similar echoes from American voters. Just a couple of weeks ago, a lot of people who opted not to go to the polls and participate in the election. But what, in terms of accessibility, as you mentioned that some people have been allowed or been able to get this voter ID card and some of them have not. So have there been any complaints about the integrity of the elections, whether or not they were indeed accessible and fair?
There are a lot of concerns about the elections. I visited about 10 polling places yesterday, at least 10. I think likely a bit more, somewhere between 10 and 15. We started out very early in the morning. The polls opened at 6 o'clock. At every polling station I went to, except for the ones in the wealthier neighborhoods, there were scores of people complaining that they couldn't vote. And these are people who had an ID card, because the ones without the ID card didn't even bother to come to the polls because they knew they could not vote. But there were people with an ID card. Their names were not on the list. They've got these lists posted outside the polling center, and if your name is on the list, you can go vote. People were saying, well, I voted in the last election, just last fall, that fraudulent election that had to be thrown out. Why is it that my name is not on the list? There were other people who, there was a number to call. If your name is not on the list, you call this number and they'll tell you where to go. I spoke to people who went to 3 or 4 polling places. That's how determined the Haitians were to vote. But some of them were told, oh, you have to go vote in a city that's, 3, 4 hours away. And they were outraged by that because this is their polling place. This is where they always voted. So there was that sentiment, and it's a growing sentiment that somehow it's being maneuvered so that this election will yet again be stolen. So I have to say that just about every polling place I went to, particularly in the ones that were the stronghold for the Lavalas movement and party, Lavalas being the party of President Jean-Bertrand Aristide, who was deposed by a U.S.-backed coup in 2004 that happened to be the 200th anniversary of the Haitian Revolution. For the first time since that coup, they were allowed to run a presidential candidate, Dr. Maurice Narcisse. And it's in the Lavalas areas that I found were a focus of problems of people being able to vote. But I didn't see at other polling places.
Expand on that, if you could, for us, Margaret, because there were 27 candidates seeking to become Haiti's next president. Obviously, that's a bit of a crowded field. So were there any favorites, anybody that seemed to be having the popularity or the will of the people behind them? Obviously, we won't know these results for several days, but given how you've been speaking with voters there on the ground, who seemed to be having the ear of the Haitians, as it were?
The person having the ear of the Haitians, the majority of Haitians are impoverished, okay? That's the vast majority, close to 90%. The Lavalas candidate and the Lavalas movement and party, impoverished people identify with that party. I can't tell you how popular Dr. Maurice, of course, President Aristide, who's been out campaigning with her, very revered, right? But if you look at the official polls that were being done, you see the candidate that was handpicked by the outgoing president, Michel Martelly, who has had a history, by the way, of being, as a youth, connected with the repressive Duvalier regime. His handpicked candidate, Jovenel Moïse, was said to be the leading candidate. Second was Jude Celestine, who is connected with a former president, Prévert. And the Maurice Narcisse. There were basically 4 candidates that were considered the top candidates. But what people are telling me, what people told me when I was out on the street, they said, this is the real poll. I was in Cité Soleil on Friday, which is the most impoverished part of the Western Hemisphere, the most impoverished place in the Americas. The poverty there makes no sense. There were tens of thousands of people on the street in support of Lavalas and Dr. Maurice Narcisse, and they were saying, this is the poll. You want a poll, look around you. And that told me something, because in the election that happened last fall, that was found to be fraudulent and that was thrown out, guess what? Jovenel Moïse, the candidate of Michel Martelly, was #1, Jude Celestine, #2. And the leaks that are now coming out started last night, Kim, and early this morning, and being promoted by the mainstream media. They are saying that, again, Jovenel Moïse is #1. Some are saying that he likely won by as much as 64%. That's the same percentage that he, quote unquote, won in an election that was so fraudulent that the ballots that were examined by officials, 90% of those ballots were found to be fraudulent. How is that possible? How do these things happen? So there's a lot to learn for those of us in the United States, but also around the world, to really look to see what happens in Haiti, how elections are stolen and how a favorite, perhaps, of the United States somehow manages to get installed. Now, it's not over yet because the Lavalas movement and party, they're making it clear from their internal polls and the strength of the voters that went out yesterday in areas of their stronghold that they think their candidate won in the first round. So it's very interesting to see how things are going to develop today. I should mention, Kim, that last night, a huge marketplace that was run by impoverished women in Pétionville was burned to the ground. These women lost everything. And the supermarkets, or the owners of the supermarkets, have to gain by the market women not being out there, being able to sell their produce and other needs. So right now, the situation is very, very tense.
So, Margaret, a couple of things, because I'm curious as to what issues were driving the Haitian people to go to the polls, obviously, to make their voices heard. But when you talk about the fraud, especially of the last election, I was reading reports about how there were some measures instituted this time around to help prevent the fraud, something about how they changed the use of an ink on the actual ballot in order for fraud not to happen. Can you tell us about that? Like what new channels were put into place to try to quell fraud, if these reports are to be believed?
Well, we're told some measures were put in place, but you have to keep in mind that the head of the CEP is someone who was very involved in that coup that took place in 2004. And a key advisor to the Electoral Council is Andy Aped, who also played a major role in that coup. Okay, so you'll get the picture, Kim, just from that to see the people who are really in charge here. One of the things that I heard that was very widespread, people were very worried of a thin piece of plastic being put over the paper people had to make their mark on to vote. So you make your mark and you think you're voting for a particular candidate, but then that plastic could be removed and any old candidate be filled in. So this was one concern. Another concern that the Electoral Council put in place allegedly to address fraud is that they said that in each polling place where there was a maximum of, let's say, 550 votes in each particular small polling place, that if any particular candidate got more than 200 or more votes in that polling place, those votes would be set aside. Now, as you could well imagine, candidates who knew that they had strongholds in areas like Bel Air or City Soleil, for example, objected to that because there was a very real chance that their candidate could wind up getting 300 or perhaps even 400, if not more, votes in that particular area. So that means those votes then will not be counted. Now, this might seem like a small measure, but as you know, as we saw from the election in the United States, all of these things add up. So even though the Electoral Council said, well, we've put these measures in place and we're trying to make sure this fraud doesn't happen, why was it that there were so many people who had voted for years at the same polling place and their names weren't on the list to vote? Why was it that people were being sent 2 or 3 or 4 hours away to vote in an area that they're not even from, that they don't even live in order to vote? Kim, it reminded me of kind of like the poll tax. Remember when they would ask black people, well, to recite Shakespeare or something they knew would be impossible in order to vote? So if you're looking at an impoverished grassroots person and you tell them at 10 o'clock in the morning, you know what, you have to travel 3 hours to go vote, what do you think is going to happen? So I think we have to be realistic and really read between the lines. And not only, I'm so glad the Real News Network is covering this Pacifica Radio. Of course, we'll try to do our bit, because the members of the mainstream media that I ran into and I spoke to yesterday, it seemed as though they already knew what they were going to report. And frankly speaking, they didn't have that much interest because there is this kind of attitude of, though, these Haitians, well, they really don't know how to do things, right? So what do you expect to happen down here? So we'll see how it plays out. But I did, Kim, one troubling note. I had not one, but several people say to me, yesterday, meaning voting day, the system will either work or it will be destroyed. And I think that's a real warning sign.
Well, and also talk about that, Margaret. I'm curious as to which issues, I'm sure there are lots of issues that Haitians wanted to make their voices heard at the polls. But as you mentioned, with the previous election being tossed out because of massive fraud, if there are found to be irregularities or some sort of manipulation of the electorate during, as they are counting up the votes for Sunday's election, what are the people there prepared to do if they are dissatisfied with the outcome?
It remains to be seen, because when emotions are very high in the lead up to the election, emotions are very, very high today of people feeling betrayed. You ask about issues. A lot of people said, we want the right to choose our own president. We don't want the United States, the European Union, the Organization of American States, toting the line of the U.S., or even the UN, to interfere in our process. We want to be able to choose our own president, someone that is simpatico with the majority of the Haiti's impoverished people, right? So you found that people were telling me things. I met with a group of women who represented a national older women's organization, and they said, you know what, in the last 12 years, nothing has happened to help us. We're starving, we're hungry. We need somebody who will be able to do something, who will be able to help us economically. In Cité Soleil, I saw some of the building that had begun prior to the coup, of beautiful buildings, apartments that people could go live in. That was halted as a result of the coup. I saw the little slightly above shacks, the few houses that the Red Cross built after the earthquake. So people feel that they're really sick and tired of international interference, but also these large non-governmental organizations that collect tons of money that people out of the kindness of their own hearts give, thinking that the Haitian people will benefit from it after the earthquake or even after Hurricane Matthew. And then the Haitian people see very little of that. So there's a lot of concern about that NGO industrial complex. Haiti has more non-governmental organizations per square mile than any other place in the world, but yet the place remains impoverished. The UN has been an occupying force in Haiti since 2004, beginning of 2005. Nothing has been done with the Haitian infrastructure, the roads, the sewer system. The Haitian people have gained nothing from that. But what you see tanks on the street. I saw tanks on the street yesterday near polling stations. You see heavily armed, UN troops as well as police. There's an infamous police force called Boyd. They had tanks out on the streets, and officers carrying huge weapons right close to polling places. So this is what Haitian people put up with, and they want to move from just not surviving at all to have, even if they remain poor, to have some dignity and to be able to eat. They want some future for young people. They want housing. They want education. They want the same things that you and I would want. Kim. You know, it's not that there's a different measure because they are Haitian, and rightfully they should have it. And we know the reason that Haiti has been so impoverished is because so much of Haiti's wealth has been sucked out of Haiti. Haiti had to pay reparations to France for the loss of their slaves and for the cost of the war, the Haitian Revolution. They continued to pay those reparations until right after World War II. You know, the beautiful forests of Haiti destroyed, all that lovely French antique furniture people like to go out and buy, you know, to keep that in mind. So Haitians have really paid a price, but you know, they also say that we're resilient and we're prepared to die for our freedom. The revolution we started so long ago, we are still trying to attain its goals, Kim.
We've been speaking with the host and producer of the Sojourner Truth radio show, Margaret Prescod. She is on the ground in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, covering the elections of that country. The results still not known, but they should be revealed in the coming days. Margaret, we appreciate your reporting today. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Kim.
And thank you for watching the Real News Network.